So last week, James, we had political leaders from around the world speaking at the UN General Assembly. We had Australia, amongst other nations, recognising Palestinian statehood. Mm-hmm. And we had Donald Trump give one of the most bizarre and probably dystopian speeches I've heard any leader at the UN.
It was pretty wild, man.
Yeah.
It's one of my favourite times of the year, Geordie, because it's that time of the year when we have the United Nations General Assembly. So everyone gathers in New York. This is the 80th session, obviously, as it was formed after the Second World War.
Yep.
So leaders and representatives from all over the globe, all countries big and small that are UN member states, everyone gathers around, and then respective leaders all kind of, discuss and give speeches, and they discuss goals for, war and peace, international development goals, climate change. They're typically the focus of the majority of the speeches. Obviously, we had some pretty strange ones this year. We had Donald Trump going on his just incoherent rambling, which we'll get to. But like you said, it was quite important because he had numerous countries around the world, typically like Australia, the UK, Canada, France, all deciding to publicly recognise Palestinian statehood.
Yes.
In an actual official capacity. And lots of the United Nations speeches were actually pretty well based around this issue, the issue of the Israel-Gaza conflict, how it has kept going. And this has also revealed some of the, shall I say, deficiencies of the United Nations system. And I think that is actually one of the grievances that many people are bringing up. So for the most part, I've gone over quite a few of the speeches that I thought were quite significant from lots of world leaders. I'd recommend the audience and yourself and just anyone to go on. Lots of them are quite good to listen to.
Yep.
And it really does give you, especially the smaller nations, the more developing world nations, I find it gives you quite a valuable perspective on how they view the world and these issues, because we are so caught up in our kind of Western-centric
and the political news cycle, week in, week out.
News cycle that you can. It's very easy to become detached from how smaller nations view these issues as well.
Yeah, and the majority of humanity.
Oh, and that's it at the end of the day. That is entirely it, because typically we're used to hearing, obviously, kind of the European sphere, the United States, Russia, China, perhaps, but you have lots of smaller nations, like Barbados is one.
Yeah.
The Barbadian Prime Minister always gives what I find of quite powerful and very, very poignant speeches, and they really do highlight the issues that these nations are facing, which are completely different to ours. A big one, just off the top of my head, is climate change.
Yep.
So you have people, and we'll get to this a bit later on, you have like US President Trump, for example, essentially in his speech calling climate change a hoax.
Yeah. Not essentially, he did.
He did, yeah, that's it. But then you have other people, other nations, lots of the smaller Pacific Island nations, like your Vanuatu, Fiji, Palau, lots of these really kind of tiny island states, and they're saying, well, no, climate change isn't a con, it's real, because we're losing our land.
It's going to affect us most.
It's affecting us first, and you guys are just saying it doesn't exist, and we're losing our nations, essentially.
Yeah.
And this is going to cause massive issues in the next decade or so. We're going to have a whole new, climate refugees are going to be a big thing. And what do we do with these people? These are the kind of questions that get asked and the kind of discussions that are had at the UN. However, fundamentally, I think one thing that was quite hopeful to see was most of the global leadership was, again, pretty adamant about condemning the horror that is happening not only in Gaza but also in Sudan as well.
Yep.
That's another one, and these ongoing humanitarian crises. And it was really good, especially lots of the Middle Eastern states. They're the ones that are most affected by this. Typically always give very strong responses. It's kind of a cliche that the Arabic states love getting together and having a conference where they will sit around and drink tea and discuss these horrible things, but no one actually does anything about them.
Yeah.
But there was, just on the Gaza topic itself, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was quoted with saying, the scale of death and destruction are beyond any other conflict in my years as Secretary General. Turkish President Erdogan said, everyone who is keeping silent is an accomplice to this barbarity. King Abdullah of Jordan said, repeated wars are teaching generations of Israelis and Palestinians that their only recourse is the gun. So that is a lot of the sentiment throughout the Islamic world specifically. Again, important to note that when people like Erdogan says that everyone who is keeping silent is an accomplice, well, I guess he is an accomplice to the entire situation. But it really does, I think, kind of demonstrate that the worries and the fears of humanity as being represented by the leadership at the United Nations are kind of pretty unified.
It illustrates the global sentiment on these conflicts for sure.
Absolutely.
And I think, what was it, half the delegates walked out on Benjamin Netanyahu when he stood up to speak.
I believe it was about 80 different nations, their delegations left.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that a little bit later on because I want to play some clips from people's speeches and we can kind of hear what their sentiment is, then we can contrast it on how people in some parts of the world see it and how people in other parts of the world see it. So I believe Anthony Albanese gave a fantastic speech as well. Well, not fantastic, but it was...
Fantastic's a bit of a stretch, James.
Yeah. But look, I think it was a responsible speech.
It was a responsible speech. Yeah. It was filled with a lot of the cliches that you would expect from a Western politician. Mm-hmm. I must say, there were some interesting points in there. We will play some of it.
When we support the agency of forums such as the G20 or APEC, or invest in diplomatic partnerships like the Quad, none of this means setting our national interests or our people's values aside. It means working to fulfil them. The United Nations is much more than an arena for the great powers to veto each other's ambitions. This is a platform for middle powers and small nations to voice and achieve our aspirations. And that is why Australia is seeking a place on the UN Security Council in 2029-30. And it is why we are bidding to co-host the 31st Conference of the Parties with our Pacific family. Nations for whom climate change is more than an environmental challenge, it is an existential threat. This is a place for the global spotlight to shine on suffering and struggles that might otherwise be forgotten, and for the international community to work together to advance our shared interests and to tackle challenges we cannot meet alone. In 2025, we are confronted by all manner of these challenges in old forms and new. Dictators whose hold on power derives solely from their capacity for cruelty to their own citizens. Tyrants who invade sovereign nations to further their own ambitions. Regimes willing to crush their own people beneath the weight of oppression. Autocracies deploying new technology to undermine our trust in democracy, institutions and each other. Intimidation and coercion on the seas and in the skies, endangering lives and risking escalation. Terrorists and states which sponsor terrorism spreading hatred. And if ever we had the luxury of imagining that breaches of international law were not our concern, or that conflict and turmoil in another part of the world could not affect us, those days are long gone. Just last month, Australian security agencies confirmed that the Iranian regime orchestrated the firebombing of a synagogue in Melbourne and a Jewish restaurant in Sydney. Criminal acts of cowardice aimed at spreading fear. We expelled the Iranian ambassador from Australia, the first time since the Second World War that our country has taken such a step.
So the speech goes for about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That's a couple minutes from it. A couple things that are worth noting. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Australia wanting to become a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Mm-hmm. Dreaming.
Yeah, dreaming. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
No, that's something definitely not going to happen. I find the cliche of the whole democracy versus autocracies and tyrants and the rise of dictators.
It is very tired. It's a very tired cliche.
There's no nuance to it whatsoever. No. It's very cliche. And, for example, I do wonder, is he referring to the increasing dictatorial and authoritarian regime that is the Trump administration.
I actually do think that because he was talking about, obviously, authoritarian regimes crushing dissent at home. So I think that's kind of maybe an allusion to the kind of the Eastern, the Russia, China, Iran kind of bloc. But I think it's very important what he was talking about, the escalation in, like, you know, sovereign states above their skies and in their waters.
Yeah.
I think that could quite easily be a little dig at the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Not only on their kind of domestic front, but also their incursions into the Caribbean and
Well,
the increasing militarization of the Caribbean.
I hope that he has, should I say, the balls to imply that in the speech. I
So
hope
do I.
that's what he means, and he's not just referring to the Russia and China's.
No, well, but I think as well, he spoke in such a way that anyone can take that
that's
in any
right.
way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it was intended, obviously, to be like that. However, James, he doesn't call out the violations of international law by the United States
No.
or by Israel.
No.
He just refers to the intelligence agency's finding of Iran behind those arson attacks here in
Yes,
Australia.
yes.
That we did a segment on. We are both pretty still sceptical of those findings. There's
Yep.
lots of questions there. And he didn't once mention the UN Commission's finding that Israel is committing genocide.
Genocide, no. And we'll see that a lot amongst the Western leaders. There are some other nations and their representatives, Geordie, that are a bit less hesitant in calling out the injustices that they see. Possibly, in my opinion, the most direct and powerful speech was from Colombian President Gustavo Petro,
Yes.
who, one of my favourite world leaders, just a true powerhouse.
Yeah.
In his 40-minute speech, he covered a wide variety of topics. So he didn't just talk about the genocide in Gaza, but also the fallacy of the United States foreign policy in the Caribbean and Latin America. Yep. And he also spent a lot of time warning about the dangers of climate change and the global direction of the world in these matters. So I'm going to play a clip from his speech as well. It goes for 40 minutes. I've just got a couple minutes here, and you can kind of get an idea of the thrust of what he's saying.
You shouldn't look at the drugs. You should look at who has the power and who dominates. This is why I speak to you as a decertified president. I've been decertified by President Trump without him having any right to do this, a human right or divine right or any sensible reason. They want to force by violence tens of thousands of peasants to do what the U.S. government wants to do, which are influenced by mafia groups in Colombia. Thousands of peasants are massacred in Colombia by politicians who were senators, who were presidents, who were ministers, that were bribed and on the payroll of the drug mafia. And at the same time, they were allies of the extreme right based in Florida of the United States, and now allies of the Trump administration. They've been allied for decades with drug lords, cocaine drug lords in Colombia. They were allies, and so they led this anti-drug policy from Washington. I don't know if Trump even knows that his foreign policy towards Colombia, Venezuela, and towards the Caribbean is based on advice from Colombians who are allies of the cocaine mafia. I myself denounced these politicians, including the paramilitaries, drug traffickers, naming them by their names in the Congress of Colombia when I was senator, and many times they wanted to kill me because of that. And they did not want me to become president. They wanted me to shut up, and now they don't want another progressive government to be reelected. That is why I've been personally decertified, and they have spread calumny against Colombia. Colombia has confiscated the highest amount of cocaine in the history of the country under my government, and I've been decertified.
Fantastic speech.
Yeah.
Notably, for those who are listening and not watching, the US representatives do leave halfway through his speech.
Halfway through what he's saying. Yeah, that's how base this man is, in my opinion. But look, he's talking about very real things.
Yeah.
He's talking about, well, the influence of the US policy in his region, being the president of Colombia, and how essentially that has been dictated by the bankers, the gangsters, the mafiosos,
Yeah.
in alliance with the far right in Colombia. And they had, a decades-long kind of civil war funded by these actors, funding paramilitary groups, killing, as you said, tens of thousands of people. And that has a devastating effect on his nation. And he is very vehemently calling it out. And he's saying there's other parts where he's like, look, the people that run this are not in Colombia. It's not like the Pablo Escobars. It's the people in New York, in Washington, in the city of London
James.
that launder the money.
And you did a fantastic short and segment the other week on this topic.
Thank you.
No, it's interesting because this discussion, this is never brought up in Western newspapers,
No.
in Western analysis.
No.
It's never discussed.
No, it's just, we have El Chapo Guzman. He's just this one man who runs a cartel.
Yeah.
Or we've got Pablo Escobar. We've got these characters. And it fits into that real kind of like Netflix understanding
Yes.
of
Yeah.
this kind of blockbuster understanding of what these issues are.
And that's the way they want you to understand it. That's
Absolutely.
right.
And it's a lot more nuanced. But he didn't just talk about that. I think that obviously really infuriated the Americans.
Oh, yeah.
He talked about the effects of climate change, obviously Colombia being an incredibly biodiverse part of the world,
Yeah.
And how that is directly damaging the communities in that nation. He also obviously talked about the imperative to have, a ceasefire in Gaza. He, is very adamantly pro-Palestinian. So adamantly pro-Palestinian, Geordie, he actually joined a pro-Palestine rally out the front of the United Nations afterwards and did it like as a proper commoner and did a speech where he was essentially saying, look, the governments aren't going to do anything about this. We need to have a global transnational fighting force that needs to travel to the Middle East and liberate Palestine. And he also said, like, I'm kind of paraphrasing, he was like, look, if I need to join the front lines and fight, then I will.
Truly a man from the people, for the people.
For the people, absolutely.
James, was he also not a former guerrilla, revolutionary fighter?
I believe he was a former revolutionary fighter in Colombia as well.
That's pretty wild.
And again, has grounded his political philosophy in a working class movement, essentially. But
and a sovereign movement for his country as well.
absolutely, yeah. So what happened after that? He got his visa to the United States revoked.
Yes.
He proceeded to go back to Colombia, and they just expelled the entire Israeli ambassadorial team. So look,
James, should I just point out that his mental health could be deteriorating and that he may accidentally shoot himself with a firearm?
yeah, with 6 bullets. Yeah, or there might be an unnamed cartel hitman gunning for him. I'm sure that is the case in Colombia. But look, yeah, obviously such a humane and selfless actions from a world leader in defiance of the imperial hegemon cannot be tolerated. So on the other end of the spectrum, you have kind of that real anti-imperialist perspective. On the other end, another speech that I thought was really quite interesting was Volodymyr Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, obviously. And he's kind of on from our lens of political analysis, he's kind of on the more pro-imperialist side of things, shall we say. So he perceives his fight is against Russian imperialism, but he is obviously knowingly using his country as a tool of Western imperialism.
Well, I listened to a little bit and I was surprised because I expected him to just be drumming up support for the war against Russia.
And saying the same things he's been saying for the last 3 years.
Correct. However, I was pleasantly surprised by what he had to say.
Absolutely. So I'll play a clip here. I actually think it was probably the best public speaking performance Zelensky's ever done, to be honest.
Perfectly well, international law doesn't work fully unless you have powerful friends who are truly willing to stand up for it. And even that doesn't work without weapons. It's terrible, but without it, things would be even worse. There are no security guarantees except friends and weapons. No Ukrainian choice this kind of reality. And knowing our people, they would have chosen a different priority. Ukrainians are peaceful people, but they are people who want to live freely in their own independent country. That's why we invest in defense. For many nations, there is simply no other way left. Nations can speak about their pain from stages like this, but even during bloodshed, there isn't a single international institution that can truly stop it. That's how weak these institutions have become. What can Sudan or Somalia or Palestine or any other people living through war really expect from the UN or the global system? For decades, just statements and statements. And even everything happening in Gaza remains without a way out. Even now, Syria, after all the changes, still has to appeal to the world to ease the sanctions that are choking its economy. It has to ask and wait. Syria deserves stronger support from the international community. And as Russia's war against my country goes on, people are still dying every week. Yet there is no ceasefire because Russia refuses.
It wasn't in that speech, but I believe he did also warn against nuclear proliferation and the use of AI in warfare.
Of course. And I guess Ukraine is kind of the testing ground for these kind of technologies. But I found that really interesting as well, because he's kind of coming at it from the other side. And he likens his struggle to the struggle of the Palestinians.
And Syria as well.
As well. I guess him and his counterpart, Jelani, have a lot in common. But yeah, what he's kind of saying is, look, it's good to have these international institutions, but they are essentially powerless. And the real power in the international sphere comes from having friends with guns and money.
And material capabilities.
And that is very true. I find that is very true. I also find, and that's probably a sentiment that many people on the pro-Palestine side of the argument would feel as well.
Yeah.
They'd have the exact same sentiment. They'd say, well, look, everyone, as Zelensky said, statements and statements and statements and no concrete actions.
And that's really what the recognition of Palestine is. It is a statement. I guess it's it's Western leaders trying to absolve themselves in the eyes of history that they actually did something.
Yes, of course. We're on the right side of history. We recognise
signing a piece of paper, having an embassy, etc., but it's not changing the reality on the ground.
No, it's not changing the material reality on the ground. But I think that is a super... I think very interesting and very fascinating. Although I would say that, in my opinion, and this kind of goes for the case of Palestine and for the case of Ukraine as well, I think that obviously this situation these nations are in, it doesn't prove why international institutions are kind of not required. Because in my opinion, if these institutions worked the way they were designed to, we wouldn't be in these situations in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think you have that kind of consistent subversion of these systems. And we can look at that. You go back as far as, to the breakup of the Soviet Union, essentially, and the conditions that have culminated for us to have this war now in Ukraine. And you could say the same thing about the Gaza-Israel conflict.
Yeah.
But I think it's just, again, super interesting to think both sides of the spectrum there.
So they were some of the more better put together and eloquent speeches. I think we should probably move on to the more...
insane.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so look, we just had the, shall we say, the pro-peace aspect. We've just looked at a kind of some more pro-peace and like pro-humanity themes that these leaders are talking about. Let's go to the other side of the spectrum, Geordie. Let's see what the pro-war and pro-death side of humanity has to say. So firstly, I'm going to play a segment of the man himself, Bibi Netanyahu's speech. It's about as psychotic as you'd expect. I'd expect someone in his position to kind of, come out and, if that was me, I'd say, look, obviously we're in a crisis, we're in a war, we've been attacked, October 7th, condemn Hamas, rah, rah. Yep. Obviously you can come out and be like, look, obviously some civilians have died. It's unavoidable in war, and you kind of have a more reasonable centrist position, especially if you are a perpetrator and a human rights violator and just frankly a terrible human.
And paint himself as a statesman in the eyes of the global community.
Absolutely. And I think Benjamin Netanyahu has realised that not only does he not need the global community, he doesn't want to appeal to them either. I will play this, and it's full of all the Benjamin Netanyahu rhetoric, and he even gets a few props out as well, which he's famous for doing.
Terrorizing our citizens. In Syria, the murderous dictator Assad hosted Iran's forces, tightening a noose of death around our throats. In Yemen, the Houthis launched ballistic missiles at Israel while choking global trade at the mouth of the Red Sea. So what's happened over the past year? We've hammered the Houthis, including yesterday. We crushed the bulk of Hamas's terror machine. We crippled Hezbollah, taking out most of its leaders and much of its weapons arsenal. You remember those beepers, the pagers? We paged Hezbollah. And believe me, they got the message. And thousands of terrorists dropped to the ground. We destroyed Assad's armaments in Syria. We deterred Iran's Shiite militias in Iraq. And most importantly, and above anything else that I could say to you or that we did in this past year, in this past decade, we devastated Iran's atomic weapons and ballistic missiles programs. So here's where things stand today. Half the Houthi leadership in Yemen, gone. Yahya Sinwar in Gaza, gone. Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, gone. The Assad regime in Syria, gone. Those militias in Iraq, well, they're still deterred. And their leaders, if they attack Israel, will also be gone. And for Iran's top military commanders and his top atomic bomb scientists, well, they're gone too. Israel's 12-day war with Iran, which I renamed Operation Rising Lion, that's from the Bible. This 12-day war will go down in the annals of military history. Our daring pilots neutralized Iran's missile defenses.
Look, you get the message.
Yeah.
You get the message.
The
So
only-
his
James-
speech goes for 40 minutes. That was about 2.5 minutes. It's that for 40 minutes. It is pretty brutal.
So for those just listening, he had a picture of the Middle East and obviously
All the hostile nations.
the hostile nations, and he's ticking the boxes of each one
Yeah.
as he goes. The only prop he's missing was a victim card, James.
Yeah, good one. No, but that's it, dude. Like, he's like, all these other nations, everyone else in the world is coming out and we're like, look, we need to have more international solidarity. We need peace. There's been too much death and destruction. He comes up and he's like, yeah.
Just bragging.
Just bragging. It's like, we took out these dudes, killed these people. Look how many people we've killed. Look at how many countries we've destroyed. It is wild.
Yeah, it is.
It is truly wild.
And there's the US and Israeli delegation just applauding.
Just applauding, going so hard. Funny to note, obviously, on that clip I played there, you had the Forbes headline banner. So when they showed the hall, the assembly hall, that banner kind of covered the majority of the seats of the audience.
Yeah.
Important to note, most of the audience had left.
Yeah.
You had about 80 nations, I believe, just walked out.
Yeah.
Pretty wild, but it shows, again, he's not trying to appeal to the poor people of the world.
No, he doesn't.
Or the downtrodden of the world, or the people. You know, there's no effort to be like reconciliatory at all. It's just forwards, maximum momentum. We will kill you.
Very confident, and he has the US backing, so he can be.
He does have the US backing. Look, interesting to note as well, I've seen a few clips of Bibi doing interviews recently, and he hasn't looked himself. There was one where he came out and he goes, "We do not control President Trump." And he's like sweating. He's like, "We do not control President Trump."
And the multiple tweets where he's like, "We did not murder Charlie Kirk."
And you just think, what an odd thing to say. No one asked you. How funny. Anyways, but the point is that is Bibi at his best.
Yeah.
But it shows, like, again, I'm trying to contrast these kind of really more moderate and humane speeches and clips of speeches with that. Like, that's what we're kind of dealing with at the end of the day. Yeah, so in my opinion, his entire speech, which I wouldn't recommend anyone watch the whole thing, it's just that. It's just an exercise in just like self-masturbatory gloating. However, we come to the big dog, Geordie.
Yes.
We come to the big dog. We come to Donald Trump. In my opinion, one of the most wild UN speeches of all time. Again, not even trying to appeal to the rest of the world, to the majority of humanity. Essentially appealing to his bloc and like the Zyocons, the neocons.
It was basically just a speech from one of his rallies.
It was essentially a rally speech.
It wasn't
yeah.
like he was at the UN addressing the globe.
No, it wasn't very statesmanlike. And I think very tone deaf. You need to know your audience.
Yeah.
I don't think Trump cares about that at all.
No.
His speech goes for an hour, which I'm not going to lie, it's a monumental effort.
Yeah.
A good chunk of that is just him kind of rambling. And it's not good rambling like Gustavo Petro, who we saw earlier. It's just this kind of not very pleasant, narcissistic Trump rambling. He goes on. I was getting some clips that I'm about to play, and there's one where he talks about the United Nations building. I reckon he spends about 5 minutes just going on. He's like, look, I offered to give them marble floors. Now they've got plastic. My escalator didn't work. The teleprompter didn't work. And he's just going on. He's like, they could have had a beautiful building, but instead they've got this. Real Trumpian. Yeah. Real Trumpian. So, well, look, we've got a couple of clips. First of all, I wanted to talk about him claiming to, trying to claim his role as a global peacemaker.
Likewise, in a period of just 7 months, I have ended 7 unendable wars. They said they were unendable. You're never going to get them solved. Some were going for 31 years, 2 of them, 31, think of it, 31 years. One was 36 years. One was 28 years. I ended 7 wars. And in all cases, they were raging with countless thousands of people being killed. I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen. But she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the 2 things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter.
Geordie, do you know what wars he's talking about?
Well, James, one of them I believe that might have been the war that went for 31 years. Was that not the Indian-Pakistani conflict?
I think so. He doesn't specify.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't specify.
Well, you don't have to, James.
No, I've ended 7 wars. I think one of them. So I think he might be talking about the India-Pakistan kind of perpetual conflict that actually kind of defines both nations.
But didn't the Indians come out afterwards and say that the US didn't do anything in the negotiations?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And the Pakistanis came out and were like, yeah, the Pak side was like, nah, Nobel Peace Prize, I think, trying to suck up to him. I think the other one was Azerbaijan, Armenia.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where he essentially just kind of told the Armenians to just secede a bunch of their territory and accept ethnic cleansing. I think one of them might have been Iran-Israel.
Yeah.
Which is a war that, you could argue they were pretty pivotal in starting.
Yeah.
So I guess if you start wars, then you can end them as well. And you can say, I can start a war, and then I can say, well, I ended the war as well, so I don't need a Nobel Peace Prize. Well, it's too much. Here is Donald Trump talking about migration. So let's just give this a listen.
Millions of people came through that southern border. Just a year ago, millions and millions of people were pouring in, 25 million altogether over the 4 years of the incompetent Biden administration. And now we have it stopped, totally stopped. In fact, they're not even coming anymore because they know they can't get through. But what took place is totally unacceptable. The UN is supposed to stop invasions, not create them and not finance them. In the United States, we reject the idea that mass numbers of people from foreign lands can be permitted to travel halfway around the world, trample our borders, violate our sovereignty, cause unmitigated crime, and deplete our social safety net. We have reasserted that America belongs to the American people, and I encourage all countries to take their own stand in defense of their citizens as well. You have to do that because I see it. I'm not mentioning names. I see it, and I can call every single one of them out. You're destroying your countries. They're being destroyed. Europe is in serious trouble. They've been invaded by a force of illegal aliens like nobody's ever seen before. Illegal aliens are pouring into Europe. Nobody is ever, and nobody's doing anything to change it, to get them out. It's not sustainable. And because they choose to be politically correct, they're doing just absolutely nothing about it. I look at London, where you have a terrible mayor, terrible, terrible mayor. And it's been so changed, so changed. Now they want to go to Sharia law. But you're in a different country. You can't do that. Both the immigration and their suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Western Europe if something is not done immediately. This cannot be sustained.
You can talk a lot of shit.
He
did accuse the UN of financing mass immigration.
Yeah, I think what he's referring to is that when you had these these migrant paths through Central America and stuff, you had UN agencies there setting up, giving people food and shelter, because these people were starving and fleeing awful conditions. So I think the United Nations kind of did its job, did what it would do anywhere else in the world, and kind of try to help to have some sort of institutional input into, again, helping people. It's funny that Donald Trump talks about, again, in that specifically, he's really appealing to his political bloc that he's trying to nurture.
And to the kind of right-wing populist groups amongst the West.
Absolutely. I do find it funny, though, because he talked about, obviously, we've shut down our southern borders because we had this illegal invasion of illegal aliens, which...
It's a wretched term.
Yeah, I hate the term illegal aliens. But, again, he said that, and he goes, no, look, because they were causing unmitigated crime. I don't think crime in the US has gone down, dude. I think it's probably at a pretty similar level as it was beforehand.
Yeah.
And even with that's one policy success I'll give to him. He did shut down their border, and they've stopped migrants. They've stopped poor brown people primarily flooding into the US, which was one of his campaign promises.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that's going to affect crime heaps as well. We've seen very highly publicised a lot of crime in the United States recently.
But I'm also not sure, because I know at a state level, a lot of the governors have said that crime is down, and that it hasn't justified Trump sending federal troops into Chicago and other states.
There you go. Yeah, there you go.
And then I've also read reports that a lot of the migrants that come into America just want to get work and get a job.
Of course, yeah.
These aren't gangsters and criminals.
No, of course. And you look at, again, the capitalist ruling class of the United States, which profits and benefits from having these
pools of cheap labour.
Pools of cheap labour, exactly. We've talked about this ad infinitum on Left Hook Media. The last Trump clip that I wanted to play was just him talking about climate change. But before we get to that, I want to, again, say that the audience he's appealing to is let's say in that speech there, he's appealing to that kind of that far right, quasi-populist political bloc that he's tried to kind of grow in Western Europe and in maybe one or two countries in Latin America, for example, Argentina, for example.
Yeah, and the UK.
But the rest of the world are not in that. No. Those politics not work on that.
Those dynamics don't exist.
So can you imagine being the Honduran delegation, and listening to him talk about all the horrible, say all those kind of nasty things about your people or anywhere else in the world? Or again, if you've been affected as a primary effect of US policy in your region, which has caused massive outflows of labour and of people, and they go to where it's safe, which is Western Europe and the US, how would you feel?
Yeah.
I find it very unstatesmanlike. And at least someone like Albanese, his speech was a bit milquetoast, but it was very broadly appealing.
Yeah. Play this last clip and we'll talk about it.
Please.
The immigration and their suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Western Europe if something is not done immediately. This cannot be sustained. Another UN official stated in 1989 that within a decade, entire nations could be wiped off the map by global warming. Not happening. It used to be global cooling. If you look back years ago in the 1920s and the 1930s, they said, global cooling will kill the world. We have to do something. Then they said global warming will kill the world, but then it started getting cooler, so now they could just call it climate change, because that way they can't miss. It's climate change, because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. Climate change, no matter what happens, you're involved in that. No more global warming, no more global cooling. All of these predictions made by the United Nations and many others, often for bad reasons, were wrong. They were made by stupid people that have cost their countries fortunes and given those same countries no chance for success. If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to...
Oh, James, in case you were sceptical about climate science, that was very reassuring.
Yeah, dude. In fact, I thought climate change is real. He completely convinced me otherwise.
Yeah, no, definitely. Gave you a good historical breakdown.
Absolutely.
Of the fallacy that is climate change.
But look, again, he was talking about, we mentioned this earlier, he's talking about, look, entire nations are going to be wiped off the map. They are getting wiped off the map. We're seeing this in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, lots of smaller island states. This is an existential threat for them, and to be honest, it's probably too late.
Yeah,
I think at this stage, he is just the personification of American capitalism,
and also
distilled into a human being,
and also the declining empire of the US.
Of course, and it's just it's come together beautifully.
Because you go back and look at past presidents, you could look at Bush Senior. Look, I haven't went and listened to their speeches, but I think I could safely say their speeches were probably a lot more coherent and serious than that.
Absolutely, yes. I think
even probably Reagan, like politicians I'm not fond of for many reasons.
Of course,
were not just that embarrassing.
No, it's terrible. It's terrible. And I think obviously coming after Obama, who was probably the best public speaker within the last, last generation of American presidents. And then, not that I agree or disagree with him, whatever, but then you have that, which is hilarious.
Yeah, it exemplifies the decay of that country.
And so, look, I think this is really interesting. This whole kind of segment, what we're seeing now, I think it's very interesting because it shows the discontent from all nations at the moment in these transnational institutions, and how that'll play out and how valid they will be in the future. I just wanted to end, Geordie, before we finish up. There was another gentleman who did a speech in the United Nations. This is from a nation that hasn't had a representative doing a UN speech since 1967, I believe.
Yep.
I'm, of course, talking about the Syrian Arab Republic.
Yes.
And one of my favourite characters in modern geopolitical discourse, the President Ahmad al-Shara. So I'm not going to play his speech. It was very short. It went for about 8 minutes. Nothing really popped out at me. However, what I did want to play was a few clips where Jelani went to a conference, the Concordia conference, while he was in New York, and he met with ex-CIA Director David Petraeus. And look, you consider these people, considering one of them was the head of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and the other one was the head of the CIA, and an ex-general that fought against Al-Qaeda, supposedly.
They'd be mortal enemies?
You'd think they'd be mortal enemies. But, Geordie, I'm going to play some footage, and I think we can both agree these guys are star-crossed lovers.
Assalamu alaikum, Sayyid Rais. Ahlan wa sahlan. And Sharafna Saidi. As you know, Mr. President, I spent over 37 years in the U.S. Army, and I was a soldier, not a diplomat. So I hope you'll forgive me if I speak with the directness of the old soldier that I am as I get the first question out of the way. Because the fact is that we were on different sides when I was commanding the surge in Iraq. You were, of course, detained by U.S. forces for some 5 years, including, again, when I was the 4-star there. And here you are now as the president of Syria, which your forces liberated from the murderous Bashar al-Assad regime to participate in your first UN General Assembly as the president of your country. Earlier this year, you met the President of the United States among many other world leaders. Please help us understand how you got from Al-Qaeda in Iraq 20 years ago to where you are today, Syria's head of state on stage in New York City.
So please, sorry.
There's not only are they just the US so good at building these people up, they just know how to rehabilitate them later when they need to be, when they become useful again.
It's amazing. It truly is amazing. Like, he's gushing. He's like an OnlyFans fanboy that finally paid $10,000 to have a fan meet up with his favourite e-girl, for example. He's just so excited to speak to Jelani. And again, I'm going to say it, Jelani pulls off the statesman role so well.
He does.
I think he is a disgustingly intelligent man.
Yeah.
Jelani. I think he is very smart. In fact, I think his intellect is far superior than Petraeus's there. But
True story of rags to riches,
Rags
isn't
to
it, James?
riches.
From the former leader of ISIS to the head of Syria.
But one could almost say it's like, it's not two old enemies meeting up. It's two old friends meeting up, Joy. And there's just one more here. And this shows how much Petraeus, he in that interview, he again gushes about how much respect he has for Jelani, and but he really actually cares not just about his position politically as the leader of Syria, but also how he is personally.
Mr. President, I have some sense of how tough your job is right now, how much is riding on you personally, and I know you have to be keenly aware of that. The pressure has to be enormous. When people ask me, what was it like to command the surge in Iraq, I would respond by saying it was the most grinding experience of my life, but it was also the most important one. So this next one is about you personally. How are you holding up under all this pressure? Are you getting time to do some thinking? Are you getting enough sleep at night? Again, I've been there, and it is so very, very hard. And your many fans, and I am one of them, we do have worries.
Oh, that is wholesome and just so wild at the same time.
Bro, Habibi, how are you holding up? How are the wife and kids? Like, it truly boggles my mind.
Yeah.
It really does bog my mind. And that's, I guess, where we're at. That's where global politics is at now.
Yep.
Yeah, there's not much more I can say. I just want to end on that. It's a bit of levity because I find Jelani such an interesting character, and I will keep covering him as we go into the future.
For sure.
And obviously we'll keep covering all these developments that are happening in the global sphere as we go into the future as well.
Yeah, James, and we've got 3 more years of Trump, so we have 3 more fantastic speeches.
And I'm looking forward to everyone, mate. That's it.
Thanks for joining us.
Yep.
If you like what we do at Left Hook Media, please like, share and subscribe. We'll see you later.
Ciao.